By the end of 1997, it was clear that the most likely winner of the 5th generation of consoles was going to be the PlayStation, after it established a dominating lead over the Sega Saturn and Nintendo 64. For the still somewhat young games industry, it was just another major shakeup. First it was Atari, then Nintendo, then Sega. Now it looked like it was Sony's turn to shine as the innovator of the games industry. But unlike the success of past game consoles, Sony's success would not be limited to simply beating Sega and Nintendo. For the PlayStation, the sky was the limit, and a journey to cross new boundaries in the gaming world presented itself. PlayStation was on its way to be the first home game console in history to sell more than 100 million units worldwide. This is the story of the PlayStation. In the 4th part of our series looking at the history of Sony's first console, we're taking a deep look at some of the most important games to hit the PS1 in 1998 and 1999, as Sony began its ascension to market leader in the wide world of video games. 1998 got off to a strong start for the PlayStation within a few weeks of celebrating the new year. At the end of January, 2 major titles hit the PlayStation. The first was Final Fantasy Tactics by Square. Square published the title in Japan themselves, but enlisted Sony to publish the game in North America following the success of Final Fantasy VII. Tactics was the first of 4 titles released in the SRPG spin-off series, with follow-ups coming to the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS. A full remake of the title, known as Final Fantasy Tactics: War of the Lions, was released for the PSP in 2007. The second big title for January was a follow-up to Capcom's 1996 hit Resident Evil, simply titled Resident Evil 2. For the sequel, Shinji Mikami stepped down as director, taking on the role of producer instead. Replacing him was Hideki Kamiya, known today for directing titles like Okami and Bayonetta, as well as his penchant for blocking people on Twitter. Development started within a month following the original game's release, but a complete restart was made around 2/3 of the way through development to give the game a more cinematic tone. In the end, the changes were well worth it. Resident Evil 2 was a critical success and outperformed the original in sales by nearly 1 million units. Capcom's next big release for the PlayStation came in April, when Breath of Fire 3 was released for the system at the end of the month. Previous entries in the series were released exclusively on the Super Nintendo, marking yet another series to abandon Nintendo in favor of Sony's CD-based console. On the same day in North America, Hot Shots Golf was released, developed by Camelot Software and published by Sony. Camelot, best known today for their work on the Mario Tennis and golf games, only developed the first title in the series before handing it off to Clap Hands, a second-party developer for Sony. Outside of North America, the game and series are known as Everybody's Golf. Later releases in the series use this name globally. The biggest release for the PlayStation in April was the 3rd entry in Namco's arcade fighter, Tekken. Tekken 3 was the final entry of the fighting game series to be released on the PlayStation, but it left its mark. Strong critical reception and word of mouth helped the game climb the sales charts. Over 8 million copies of the game were sold on the PlayStation, landing it at number 5 on the list of best-selling PlayStation titles. May was another major month for the PlayStation, despite there being only one major release. After hitting Japanese store shelves at the end of 1997, Gran Turismo raced its way onto the PlayStation in Europe and North America. Developed by the recently formed Polis Entertainment, Gran Turismo took over 5 years to develop for the PlayStation. Polis, at the time an internal studio within Sony, previously released Motor Tune Grand Prix 2 on the PlayStation in 1996, and built much of Gran Turismo's foundation off of that title. Gran Turismo was a major success on the PlayStation. The combination of slick graphics, fun gameplay, the near universal appeal of racing cars, and the recent release of the dual analog controller helped push Gran Turismo past Final Fantasy VII to become the best-selling game on the PlayStation, with over 10 million copies sold worldwide. As June rolled around, the 4th annual E3 was held once again in Atlanta, Georgia. Sony had a major presence at the conference, spending big bucks to market the recently released Gran Turismo. Sony even brought on the popular rock band, the Foo Fighters, to perform at the party held on the final night of the event. Sony was big news, and they were making sure everyone knew. But a little console, poking its head up among the crowd, would offer PlayStation the threat it needed to continue investing in the future of gaming. Like so many times before, the next generation of gaming was right around the corner, and Sega was chomping at the bit to have their new console snuff out any hope Sony had at keeping its place as the top console maker. The rest of summer for the PlayStation was highlighted by new releases and ports of popular PC titles. In June, Grand Theft Auto hit the PlayStation in North America, setting the series up for its explosion in popularity just a few years later. The end of August saw two other notable releases for the PlayStation: Mega Man Legends, the first 3D game in the series, and Tenchu, Stealth Assassins, a first-person stealth title, made their way to North America and Europe. Japan received both of these titles in 1997 and March 1998 respectively. Just a few days later, on September 9th, the PlayStation celebrated the 3rd anniversary of its North American launch, and with it, two major game releases. Parasite Eve, a horror-inspired action RPG developed and published by Square, was the first option for many gamers. Parasite Eve was notable for being Square's first M-rated game, and helped the company establish a brand beyond typical fantasy RPGs that the company had become known for in the NES and Super Nintendo eras. Spyware the Dragon was released on the same day to massive critical and commercial success. First revealed at E3 1998, Spyro was another joint venture between Sony and Universal Media, after the two companies found great success with Naughty Dog's Crash Bandicoot 1 and 2. The title was marketed towards younger gamers, in part to help Sony combat Nintendo's lineup of titles. Spyro, like Crash before him, was loved by PlayStation fans. The game sold nearly 5 million copies on the PlayStation, and began the successful Spyro franchise of video games. October was a month filled to the brim with iconic releases. On October 20th, Square's Xenogears was released. The RPG epic wasn't a big seller, but its spiritual successors Xenosaga and Xenoblade Chronicles found greater success. The next day, Sony released Medieval, a 3D action game developed by Sony Computer Entertainment Cambridge. Sony funded further efforts to turn Medieval into a series like Spyro and Crash, but these efforts failed to produce similar results. The latest game in the series, for the PlayStation 4, is a remake of the original title, and it came out in 2019. On the same day as Medieval, the biggest PlayStation game of 1998 was released. Published by Konami with famed video game developer Hideo Kojima in the director's chair, Metal Gear Solid became an overnight success on the PlayStation. The cinematic storytelling, impressive visuals, and simple yet refined gameplay helped the game sell over 7 million copies on the system. The game's protagonist, Solid Snake, became an instant PlayStation icon, and the series became an integral part of the PlayStation branding. It wasn't until the 2014 release of Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes that a Metal Gear game would launch on another platform other than PlayStation. On that day, it was released on the Xbox 360 and Xbox One, as well as the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4. It was only 10 days later before another trio of releases lit up store shelves. On October 31st, Twisted Metal 3, Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, and Brave Fencer Musashi, a new property developed and published by Square, hit the PlayStation. Less than a month later, Lara Croft made her annual appearance on the PlayStation with the release of Tomb Raider 3 on November 20th. The holiday season was fast approaching, but Sony still had one last release for the PlayStation. On November 27th, the DualShock controller was released. Like the dual analog controller before it, the DualShock featured the standard PlayStation button layout and two analog sticks. However, hidden underneath the iconic design of the DualShock laid one of the best rumble features seen in gaming to date. The DualShock's release was only further enhanced when Ape Escape was released the following month. The game featured impressive rumble features and required a dual analog controller to play, offering up a new and unique experience at the time that could only be played on PlayStation. As the year came to a close, Sony was still riding high thanks to the large library of new releases hitting the system. 1998 featured a ton of heavy-hitting games on rival platforms, including Pokemon Red and Blue and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time from Nintendo, and Half-Life from Valve, alongside several other big PC games. While the system held its own footing, 1999 would be a different beast. The PlayStation was entering its 5th year on the market, and new, more powerful hardware was just around the corner. The beginning of 1999 was uncharacteristically slow for PlayStation releases. February provided two new games for North Americans to get their hands on. The first was Psiphon Filter, a third-person stealth shooter developed by Edic, better known today as Sony Bend Studio. Psiphon Filter was a bigger success than Edic's previous efforts on the PlayStation, Buzzy 3D. The game was published by Sony and became its own series, with 2 sequels being released on the PlayStation and several titles released on the PlayStation 2 and PSP. Just a few days later, horror fans were treated to another new release from Konami, Silent Hill. Development on the game began in the months following Resident Evil's success, as Konami was trying to broaden the appeal of their games for Western audiences. Silent Hill was another horror game success story, with more than 2 million copies of the game being sold. A trio of sequels were developed for the PlayStation 2, with additional games and spin-offs being made throughout the 2000s, turning Silent Hill into one of Konami's most beloved franchises. In the spring, Sony released the results from the physical year 1998 and revealed a startling number: In the past 12 or so months, Sony sold more than 20 million PlayStations, putting the system's lifetime sales at over 50 million. They were in reach of stealing Nintendo's crown as the most popular home console of all time. The fall of 1999 was another major season for the PlayStation. The Legacy of Kain: Soul Reaver, developed by Crystal Dynamics, marked an end to the summer gaming drought when it was released on August 17th. A follow-up to Blood Omen, developed by Silicon Knights, Soul Reaver was made by Crystal Dynamics, who would steer the series going forward. On the same day, Jammer Lammy was released. The game was a spin-off of the popular Parappa the Rapper title and focused on rhythm guitar playing as opposed to rapping. At the end of the month, Capcom's Dino Crisis hit the system and was another hit for the Japanese publisher. The title was developed primarily by the same team who made the original Resident Evil, with Shinji Mikami serving as both director and producer for the game. Although comparisons to Capcom's Resident Evil ran rampant, the game still sold more than 2 million copies, becoming one of the best-selling horror games on the platform. September 9th had slowly grown into a significant day for the PlayStation in North America, after launching the system on that day in 1995 and releasing major PlayStation hits in 1996 and 1998 with Crash and Spyro. For September 9th, 1999, however, arguably the most anticipated PlayStation game yet was released. Final Fantasy VIII, the follow-up to the 1997 international hit, was a massive success upon launch. Critical reception for the sequel wasn't as strong, with many pointing out flaws in the game's story and complicated card combat system. But hungry PlayStation fans couldn't get enough. Final Fantasy VIII sold more than 8.5 million copies worldwide, becoming the fourth best-selling PlayStation game in history. Later that month, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was released for the PlayStation, albeit not exclusively. The game rode the skateboarding hype of the late 90s and early 2000s to sell more than 3.5 million copies on the PlayStation alone. Tony Hawk's skating titles became a mainstay on PlayStation consoles for the next few years, before the series was ultimately shelved by publisher Activision. In October, 3 titles featuring racing landed on the PlayStation. For the 4th year in a row, Naughty Dog released a new Crash Bandicoot title, although this entry was a kart racing spin-off, as opposed to Crash's first 3 platforming adventures. The title also fulfilled Naughty Dog's contract with Universal, who, over the years, Naughty Dog had grown to dislike. In the coming years, Naughty Dog continued developing PlayStation games, with the developer being purchased by Sony in 2001 and made into a full first-party studio. Grand Theft Auto 2 splashed onto the PlayStation just a few days later, offering up more criminally inspired chaos for PlayStation fans. On October 31st, 1 year after the last entry in the series, Twisted Metal 4 was released on the PlayStation. The most talked about release of fall 1999, however, didn't feature vehicular combat, spooky settings, or a skateboard. Instead, players picked up an M1 Garand and traveled to Western Europe, nearly 60 years in the past. Medal of Honor stormed onto the PlayStation on Halloween Day and became a big hit. Developed by DreamWorks Interactive and published by Electronic Arts, Medal of Honor was one of the first games to tell the tale of World War II through the still young first-person shooter genre. The title sold more than 1 million copies on the PlayStation and laid the groundwork for the explosion of popular World War II games released in the early 2000s. November offered up big sequels to already established PlayStation classics. Spyro 2: Ripto's Rage was released on November 2nd in North America, with the European launch coming in a few days. The third entry in the Resident Evil series, known as Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, was released on November 11th. And the fourth entry of the Tomb Raider series, known as Tomb Raider: The Last Revelation, was released on November 22nd. Although by this point, gamers and critics were starting to grow tired of the archaeologist's yearly ROMs. The year was capped off with the release of Gran Turismo 2. The sequel to the PlayStation's best-selling title improved upon the original in almost every way possible. New cars, tracks, and more impressive graphics made Gran Turismo 2 almost as big a hit as the original game. Bugs and glitches present in the original release ultimately held the game back, with Sony replacing some copies of the game after launch with an updated version. Still, Gran Turismo 2 sold over 9 million copies on the PlayStation, making it the third best-selling game on the system. For the PlayStation, the end was rapidly approaching. December marked the 5th anniversary of the PlayStation's release in Japan, and the 32-bit system was past its prime. At E3, the PlayStation's lack of power was seen all over the conference. Sega was touting their new Dreamcast console, which was coming out on September 9, 1999 in North America, bringing with it the start of a new generation of systems. Nintendo was already getting the ball rolling as well, when they announced they were developing a new console under the codename Dolphin. Even PC software giant Microsoft was looking to jump into the games industry, potentially rivaling Sony's buying power. For PlayStation fans, it might have seemed like the end of a blissful ride as a new generation of consoles reared its head. But tucked within Sony's E3 booth was something that left hope. It wasn't exactly the announcement of a new system. Instead, Sony was simply showcasing emulated software of what their next console could produce. With an intended release date of October 2000 in North America, the days of the original PlayStation were numbered. Like so many systems before it, the PlayStation would soon be replaced by a new, more powerful system, and new titles for the system would dry up as developers moved to new hardware. It was the beginning of the end for Sony's first console. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the fourth part in this multi-part series covering the PlayStation. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and share the video on your favorite social media sites. In the comments, I want to know about some of your favorite games from 1998 and 1999 that hit the PlayStation. Be sure to subscribe to catch the next episode as soon as it releases. In the finale of this series, we take a look at the final few years of the PlayStation, as Sony discontinues the console to make way for a new generation.